Today I have a story that starts with an apology and ends with a truth no one expected. Imagine the one person who shattered your family's heart suddenly showing up at your door, not with excuses, but with eyes full of something deeper, remorse, longing. And something you haven't felt in years. What begins as a tense conversation slowly unravels into an unforgettable night of vulnerability, memory, and temptation. This isn't just a story about regret. It's about what happens when the past knocks literally and you choose to open the door. Stay with me. You won't believe where this goes. He knocked softly, holding a bouquet of slightly wilted flowers and an apology he probably rehearsed 100 times. My niece's boyfriend, the one who had broken her heart just weeks ago, stood at my doorstep with eyes that carried guilt and something else I could not name. I intended to be firm to remind him of the pain he caused. But as the conversation deepened and the wine flowed into midnight, something unexpected happened. In his honesty, I saw my own buried hurt, and somehow in comforting him, I started to forget the pieces of myself I thought were lost forever. It had been a quiet Saturday afternoon when he texted, just a few polite words asking if he could come by for a short conversation. At first I was surprised he still had my number. I had not expected to hear from him again, not after the way things ended between him and my niece. But there was something about the way he asked, not desperate but intentional, that made me pause. My instinct told me to decline. I had seen my niece Maya cry into my arms more than once because of him, and even though I had always liked him, I was prepared to keep my distance for her sake. Still, I typed back a simple, "Come at 6." By the time the doorbell rang, I had convinced myself this would be nothing more than a short and civil exchange. I wore something casual, a soft cardigan over an old tank top and a pair of jeans. No makeup, no effort, just enough to appear composed but detached. When I opened the door and saw him standing there, I noticed right away how different he looked, less like the carefree boy who used to come over for dinner, and more like a man who had been carrying something heavy. His eyes met mine with quiet hesitation, and he held out a modest bouquet of wildflowers. "I know this doesn't fix anything," he said softly, "but I wanted to say I'm sorry." I stepped aside and let him in. The living room still carried the scent of vanilla candles and old books. He walked in slowly, as if unsure whether he deserved to sit down. I gestured toward the couch, and he sank into it with a sigh, resting the flowers awkwardly on the coffee table. For a few moments there was silence, just the sound of the old ceiling fan spinning above us and the faint ticking of the wall clock. Then he started speaking, not rehearsed, not the kind of apology crafted to impress, but raw, honest. His name was Jordan. He told me how he had messed up, how he had not realized what he had until it was gone, and how he was not looking for forgiveness, but understanding. At first I listened like a guardian, like the woman who had seen Maya grow up with all her hope and all her fragility. But the more he spoke, the more I found myself relating to him, not as a relative anymore, but as a person, a woman who had also made mistakes, who had lost love she did not know how to keep. His words reached somewhere deeper than I expected, and before I knew it, I was no longer protecting Maya's story. I was remembering my own. I stood and walked into the kitchen, offering him a glass of red wine, and he accepted it with a soft thank you. We sat again, the air between us warmer, easier. I told him about my own heartbreak, not in detail, but enough. Enough for him to understand that life is not made of clear good guys and bad guys. Sometimes people hurt each other even when they do not mean to, and sometimes healing happens in the most unexpected company. It was never supposed to be more than that. A brief conversation, a reflection. But as the night stretched on, I noticed how our words grew softer, how the pauses between them grew longer, how he started to look at me not with guilt but with something like curiosity, a respectful kind, as if seeing me as more than the aunt figure he once knew. And I, in turn, stopped seeing Jordan as a boy. The wine lowered our defenses, but it was not about the wine. It was about the fact that two broken people had found a mirror in each other. I do not know exactly when his hand brushed against mine. Maybe during a laugh, maybe during a pause, but I remember that I did not pull away. I let the contact linger just long enough for both of us to feel it. Later, we moved to the kitchen. I made us something light to eat. Grilled cheese, the kind you make when you are trying to hold on to comfort. We sat across from each other at the small dining table. There was a different kind of silence now, one filled with questions neither of us dared to ask, but I could feel it. The air had changed. The weight of what we were both carrying was slowly being shared. He told me he had been sleeping badly, that every time he closed his eyes he saw the look on Maya's face the day she left. I nodded but said nothing. I did not want to betray her by offering him sympathy, and yet I found myself softening toward him, not because he deserved it. Maybe he did, maybe he did not, but because I could see how badly he needed it, and because I knew what it was like to carry shame alone. We talked about books about music. I learned he had started writing again, something Maya always encouraged him to do. I told him I used to write 2 short stories poems all tucked away in old journals that now lived in the back of my closet. He asked if I would share them. I laughed, but there was something in his request that made me feel seen, appreciated, like I was not just a supporting character in someone else's drama, but a woman with her own story, one worth listening to. By the time the clock neared midnight, neither of us had moved. The lighting was dim, just the small lamp by the couch casting a soft glow, and then without thinking he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. It was a small gesture, innocent maybe, but it sent a wave through me that I did not expect. I felt warm, vulnerable, and suddenly very aware of the space between us. There was a moment, one small suspended moment, when I could have stood up, walked away, reminded us both of the lines we were not supposed to cross. But I did not move. He leaned in slightly after brushing the strand of hair behind my ear, and I felt the pull in the space between us tighten. My breath slowed, not because I was afraid, but because I was suddenly so aware of his gaze, of the soft tension in the room, of my own heartbeat echoing against my ribs like it had not in years. There was no rush, no fumbling, no awkwardness, just a strange stillness, like the world was asking us to choose what came next, very, very carefully. I looked into Jordan's eyes and saw no guilt, no manipulation, only honesty. And I realized painfully and powerfully that I had not been looked at like that in a very long time. He sat back slightly, perhaps sensing the weight of what was happening. "I should not stay," he whispered, his voice cracking just a little. "I came here to say sorry not to." His words trailed off, but I knew what he meant. I nodded. I knew it too. And yet neither of us moved. That was the truth we could not say aloud, that something had shifted, and we were no longer on the safe side of that invisible line we had both sworn to respect. My hand was still resting on the table. He reached for it slowly, carefully, and placed his over mine. His touch was light, but it was not accidental. It was the kind of touch that asks a question without speaking. I turned my palm upward, letting our fingers interlock, and in that small motion I answered, "Yes, I feel it too. Yes, I want to feel alive again. Even if it is wrong, even if it breaks every silent rule we never wrote down, we move closer. Not like strangers, but like 2 people who had been circling a moment without knowing it would land here. There was no grand passion, no desperation, just quiet closeness, the kind that builds slowly, like waves filling a tide pool. I could smell the faint scent of his cologne, clean grounded, and the warmth of him felt like comfort after years of self-protection. His thumb brushed my knuckles, and I closed my eyes for a moment, surrendering to the hush. Then, almost as if the silence gave us permission, he whispered, "Can I?" He did not finish the question, but his eyes held mine like he was waiting for the world to fall apart or come together depending on my answer. I nodded once, small, barely perceptible, but enough. The next morning, sunlight poured through my kitchen window, catching the steam from the coffee I didn't remember brewing. I sat at the table, hands wrapped around the mug, staring at nothing. The night before kept replaying in my mind not just what was said, but how it felt. The way Jordan's voice broke when he said, "It meant something to me." And the way my own heart responded, aching and steady all at once. I hadn't told anyone. I wouldn't. This wasn't a story meant for gossip or confession. It was a secret, yes, but more than that, it was sacred. A moment carved out of chaos that reminded me of who I was beneath the layers of roles I'd worn for years. Aunt, sister, the strong one, the composed one, the one who never needed anything. Later that afternoon, I passed the hallway mirror and caught a glimpse of myself. I stopped. Not because of how I looked, the fine lines, the tired eyes, but because for the first time in a very long time I looked like a woman I recognized. Not polished, not perfect, but present, awake. There was softness where there used to be numbness, and in the place of regret, there was clarity. That evening, Maya called. Her voice was light, filled with the joy of her weekend. She didn't mention Jordan, neither did I. It wasn't necessary. Whatever existed between them now, it was theirs to manage. And whatever happened between Jordan and me, that was something I had folded carefully and placed inside a part of my soul that no one else would see. Before we hung up, Maya said, "Aunt Ava, you sound different." I paused, then smiled. Maybe I am, because sometimes life doesn't give us neat resolutions. Sometimes it offers us a mirror, a single sharp reflection, and a choice. And I had made mine. A week passed, then 2. The silence between Jordan and me wasn't awkward. It wasn't cold. It was intentional, respectful. We had both said what needed to be said that night on the porch. There was no unfinished business, no lingering what-ifs, just the quiet aftermath of two people who had shared something fleeting and powerful and knew better than to unravel it. But something else shifted in me. I started writing again. At first, it was just a few lines scribbled in an old journal I found buried in the back of the hallway closet, then a paragraph, then full pages. I wrote about loss, about longing, about the electric kind of connection that arrives when you least expect it and leaves you changed. I didn't write about Jordan directly, but his shadow lived between the sentences. His voice echoed in the rhythm. One morning I sat in the backyard with my notebook, the scent of lavender rising from the small bush by the porch, and I read something I had just finished out loud. The wind caught my words and I smiled, not because it was perfect, but because it was mine. For the first time in years, I wasn't writing for anyone else. I was writing to remember who I was before life asked me to be so composed all the time. Then, one Sunday, Maya came by with homemade muffins and that wide, brilliant smile she got from her mother. "I missed you," she said, hugging me tight. "I missed you too," I whispered, and I meant it. We sat on the porch, legs curled under us, sipping tea. She didn't mention Jordan, but when I asked, she nodded, gaze drifting. "We're figuring things out," she said, taking it slow this time. "He's trying." I nodded. "That's good." There was a pause. Then Maya looked at me closely, like she could see deeper. "You seem lighter somehow." And I smiled, not with guilt, not with secrecy, but with quiet truth. "I think I just stopped waiting for the world to tell me who I'm supposed to be." She didn't ask what I meant. Maybe she didn't need to. Because sometimes the deepest truths between women aren't spoken, they're simply known. It was early autumn when the invitation came. A small envelope, ivory with silver trim, tucked neatly in the mailbox among grocery flyers and forgotten bills. I knew the handwriting instantly, Maya's careful and curved, like she was always trying to make sure her words looked kind. I opened it at the kitchen counter. "You are cordially invited to our engagement dinner. Just a few close friends and family. I hope you'll come. It would mean the world to me." For a moment, my breath caught in my throat. I read the sentence again. Then again. Not because it shocked me deep down, I always knew they'd circle back, but because of the tenderness behind her words. There was no gloating, no awkwardness, just love, pure and hopeful. I pressed the invitation to my chest and closed my eyes. A younger version of me might have refused, might have claimed she was too busy, too tired, too cautious, but I wasn't that version of myself anymore. That kiss with Jordan, now just a memory folded into a quiet corner of my mind, wasn't a scar. It was a spark, a moment that woke me up. But it didn't define me, and it certainly didn't own me. So I replied, yes. The night of the dinner, I wore a dress I hadn't touched in years, soft burgundy, simple, but it hugged my waist in a way that made me feel seen. I pulled my hair back, dabbed on my mother's favorite perfume, and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back didn't look younger. She looked deeper, more lived in, and somehow more radiant. At the restaurant, candlelight danced across the faces of people I loved. Maya beamed as she introduced Jordan to a distant cousin, her fingers instinctively slipping into his. He smiled, quiet and genuine. When our eyes met, we both gave the faintest nod. Not a greeting, not a secret, just acknowledgement. We'd both moved forward. Later, as dessert was served, Maya leaned close and whispered, "Thank you for coming." "Really?" I reached for her hand and squeezed it gently. "You've grown so much, and I'm proud of you." She looked down, brushing a tear from the corner of her eye, and laughed. "Stop, you'll ruin my makeup." But she didn't pull away. That night, I walked home beneath a sky littered with stars. The cool breeze kissed my cheeks, and I felt full. Not because of what had happened, but because of what I had chosen to let go. And in that stillness, I whispered to myself, "This is grace. This is freedom." A week passed after the engagement dinner, and life settled into a calm rhythm again. But there was something different about the way I moved through the world now. It wasn't dramatic, just quieter, more deliberate, like every step I took had weight and intention. One crisp Sunday morning, I wandered through the local bookstore, the kind with creaky wooden floors and handwritten staff picks. I hadn't planned on buying anything, but there in the back near the poetry section was a face I hadn't seen in years. Noah Bennett. He'd once been a professor at the college where I took a continuing education class years ago, creative writing for adults. Back then, I was too preoccupied with everything else to notice him. Married, distracted, detached. But now I saw him differently. He wore the same glasses, same gentle smile, but something in his eyes had shifted. Like me, he had shed something heavy and learned how to breathe again. "Ava," he said, setting a book down, eyes lighting up with surprise. I smiled. "Noah. Wow, it's been, 7 years?" Closer to 10, he chuckled, stepping forward. "But yes, it's been a while." "You still writing?" "I'm trying," I said, a little embarrassed. "Mostly in private. Those are the best kinds of words, the ones you don't write for anyone else." We talked for a while between shelves about books, about cities we'd visited, about how strange it was that the older we got, the more invisible we sometimes felt, and yet how beautiful it was to be seen again. He paused, then looked at me with a kind of quiet warmth. "Can I buy you a coffee? I'd really like to hear what you've been working on." I nodded, not just because I wanted to, but because I had finally learned to say yes to the things that stirred something in me. As we walked out together, the little bell over the bookstore door chiming behind us, I realized something. This wasn't a new beginning. It was a continuation, a story still unfolding. The cafe was tucked beside the bookstore, its windows fogged with warmth against the brisk afternoon air. Inside, soft jazz played under the murmur of voices and clinking spoons. Noah ordered us 2 cappuccinos, remembering without asking that I always took mine with cinnamon on top, a detail I hadn't realized he'd ever noticed. We sat near the window, the kind of table that invited long conversations and half-read books. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes soft with genuine interest. So he said, wrapping his hands around his cup, "What are you writing about these days?" I hesitated, then surprised myself by saying the truth. Desire, regret, the ache of things unsaid. His expression didn't change. He just nodded slowly, like he understood more than he let on. "And forgiveness," I added quietly, "not for others, for myself." Noah didn't rush to fill the silence that followed. He let it breathe, let it settle. Then, with the kind of ease that comes from deep empathy, he said, "I think that's the most courageous kind of writing there is." That simple line undid me more than any flattery ever could. It reminded me why I'd picked up the pen in the first place. Not to impress, not to publish, but to make sense of what it meant to be human and flawed and still worthy of tenderness. We talked for nearly 2 hours, the sky outside turning lavender and gold. Somewhere in the middle of it, I caught myself laughing, really laughing, the kind that rises from the belly without permission. Noah watched me with quiet admiration, not like a man trying to charm his way in, but like someone grateful just to witness someone else's rediscovery. As we stood to leave, he offered to walk me home. I declined not out of caution, but because I wanted to savor this moment on my own. The weight of his kindness, the warmth of his words, the gentle reminder that something as simple as being seen could stir life back into places I'd abandoned. "I hope we can do this again," he said, pausing at the corner. "We will," I replied, and this time I meant it. Back home, I pulled out one of my old journals, the one I'd stopped writing in after the divorce. I didn't reread the past entries, I just turned to a fresh page and began. Today, I chose myself again, and it felt like the truest thing I'd written in years. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the blinds in golden stripes across my hardwood floor. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee in hand, the journal from last night still open beside me. My handwriting was messier than usual, rushed, urgent, alive. Just as I took my first sip, my phone buzzed. Maya. Her name lit up the screen like a flare. I stared at it for a second longer than I should have before answering. "Hey, sweetheart," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Hey, Aunt Ava." Her voice was warm, cheerful, unaware of the storm we'd barely survived. "I was just thinking of you. Noah and I had the best night yesterday. He took me to that little hilltop spot, remember the one with the old swing?" My heart clenched. I remembered it well. It was where I'd gone after that night with him, where I sat in silence, wondering how I'd ever find clarity again. Of course I managed. She kept talking innocent and full of gratitude, telling me how he had changed, how he was making more effort lately, how she could feel him trying to be better. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Every word from her mouth was a reminder of what could have happened if I hadn't stopped it, of what almost did. "I think he just needed time," she said finally, her voice softer. "I guess. Maybe people grow in the strangest ways." I felt a sharp pang of guilt and pride twisted together. "Sometimes they do," I whispered. After we hung up, I sat there in stillness for a long time, fingers tracing the rim of my coffee mug. I hadn't seen Noah since the cafe. That had been weeks ago now. No messages, no more unexpected visits, just distance. And that was good. That was right. But it didn't make it easy. What lingered wasn't longing, it was awareness of how close I'd come to crossing a line I'd never be able to uncross, of how much of myself I'd rediscovered in the space between almost and enough. That evening, I stood in front of the mirror. I wasn't looking for beauty. I was looking for truth, the tired lines, the softened smile, the woman I was becoming. For the first time in years, I let myself really see her, and I didn't look away. A week later, I was at the bookstore, the quiet kind tucked between a bakery and a florist, the kind where time moves slower and the air always smells like old pages and cinnamon. I had just picked up a new poetry collection when I heard a voice behind me, a voice I hadn't heard in days, but one that still echoed in my mind late at night. "Ava." I turned slowly. Noah stood there. No flowers, no apologies. Just him in a navy button-up sleeves, rolled hair messily perfect. He looked unsure for the first time since I'd known him. "I didn't come here looking for you," he said quickly. "But I'm glad you're here." I nodded, unsure what to say. "Are you alone?" "Yes. Maya's out of town visiting her dad. I needed a quiet place to think." He looked down at the book in my hand. "Poems," I glanced at the cover. "Yes. Sometimes the only way to say something real is in verse." He took a step closer. I didn't move. "I've been thinking about what we said. What we didn't say." I swallowed. "Me too." He nodded, his gaze falling for a moment to the floor before returning to mine. "I'm not here to stir things up. He paused, struggling for words. "I just wanted to tell you that I meant it. Every word that night. But I also know that meaning something doesn't always make it right." The air between us was heavy but not sharp. It was gentle, like an old song you almost forgot. "I've been trying to be better," he added quietly. "Not just for her. For me." I nodded. "And I've been trying to forgive myself for feeling alive in the wrong moment." He looked at me with that same soft honesty that undid me once. "It wasn't wrong," he said. "It was human." The clerk called out gently from behind the counter, breaking the spell. We're closing in 5, just a heads up." I turned slightly, then looked back at Noah. "Then we should go." He nodded. We didn't hug. We didn't touch. But as we stepped outside together into the cool evening air, I felt the strangest sense of peace. We had said what needed to be said, without seduction, without regret, just truth. He turned left. I turned right. But this time, there was no ache. Just gratitude for the glimpse, the moment, the reminder. Because sometimes the most honest kind of love isn't the one that stays. It's the one that teaches you how to come back to yourself. It had been 6 months since that evening in the bookstore, and the seasons had changed quietly the way time always does when you're no longer chasing it. Ava stood at her kitchen window one early autumn morning, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of chamomile tea. The backyard was blanketed in golden leaves, and the morning sun filtered through them in soft amber streaks. There was a knock at the door. She wasn't expecting anyone. She opened it to find no one there, just a small brown package, no name, no return address. Just a book, a copy of the very poetry collection she had been holding the day she saw Noah again. Inside the cover was a note written in familiar handwriting. "I hope you still find verses that speak what your heart won't say out loud. Keep writing, keep living." And she smiled, not sadly, just knowingly. She brought the book inside and placed it gently on her desk next to her journal, the one she had recently dusted off and begun to write in again. This time not about pain, but about rediscovery, joy, even desire. She no longer avoided her niece Maya's calls. In fact, they spoke more often now, and Ava had become someone Maya leaned on again, confided in about her relationship, her job, her fears. And Ava listened. Not with judgment, but with the tenderness of someone who now truly understood that life was messy, that hearts heal in crooked lines. That afternoon, Ava took a walk through the park near her home. A man jogging past her slowed down and smiled. She smiled back, not because she was looking for anything, but because she could, because she was no longer hiding. She was a woman who had crossed a line once, but chose not to make it a path. A woman who had almost forgotten she could still want, still feel, still bloom until one brief, impossible night reminded her. And now she wasn't looking backward. She was walking forward, lightly, freely, herself. Journal entry, November 3rd. I used to think closure had to be loud, some final conversation, a dramatic exit, or the satisfaction of being right. But I was wrong. Closure is quiet. It's standing in front of the mirror and realizing I don't flinch at my own reflection anymore. It's sipping morning tea without longing for someone to text. It's hearing Maya's voice full of laughter and knowing that I can love her without carrying the weight of guilt. I didn't betray her. I betrayed the version of myself that believed a woman my age shouldn't still feel desire or ache or need to be seen. But I see her now. She's me. And Noah. He didn't ruin me. He reminded me of softness, of presence, of the fact that sometimes just being held for a night can shake dust off the parts of your soul you'd let sleep too long. It wasn't a mistake. It was a moment, and moments aren't promises, they're just proof we're alive. I haven't heard from him again since the package, and I think that's for the best. Some connections aren't meant to last. They're meant to light a match in the dark and let us remember what it feels like to see again. I've started writing more. Real things, raw things, not about him, but about me. Because I'm still unfolding. And that is enough. Ava. It had been nearly a month since the last time she saw Noah. The leaves had begun to turn spiraling gently across the sidewalk, like the past refusing to let go without grace. Ava moved through her days deliberately grocery shopping with a small smile, attending weekend book clubs again, even laughing a little too loudly at the cafe when the barista misheard her name as Eva Longoria. But inside, a small flicker remained a quiet pulse that reminded her she had changed. And then on a Wednesday morning that began like any other, Maya showed up. Unannounced, a knock on the door. Familiar, eager, unfiltered. Aunt Ava Maya's voice was as bright as ever, her arms full of tulips, her face glowing with the kind of light only young love or the idea of it could give. Ava's breath hitched for a moment, but she didn't show it. Maya, she smiled, stepping aside to let her in. "What's the occasion? Just missed you?" Maya shrugged. "And Noah said you'd been quiet lately. He's worried. Said you've been distant." That name, dropped so casually, like a pebble into a still lake. Ava swallowed hard. "We've both just been busy." Maya plopped onto the couch legs folded under her tulips now forgotten on the coffee table. "He's different, you know," she said softly. "Since everything. More serious. Like he's been thinking hard about stuff. About who he is. What he wants." Ava nodded slowly. "And what do you want?" Maya looked up surprised. "I want us to grow together. I want to believe people can mess up and still come back better." There was a silence between them. A sacred, unshakable stillness. Ava reached for her niece's hand. "Then hold on to that. But don't forget yourself in the process." Maya squeezed her fingers. "I won't. I have you for that." And Ava smiled for real this time. Because even though nothing was the same and nothing would ever be simple again, she knew one thing with certainty. She had let go of the past, and in doing so, made space for whatever came next. "Dear Ava, I didn't know how to begin this, so I waited until I wasn't trying to be eloquent, just honest. There isn't a day that passes where that night doesn't drift back into my mind, not with regret, but with a quiet ache. Not because it shouldn't have happened, but because I now understand why it did. You weren't just a door I knocked on in guilt, you were the mirror I didn't know I needed. And somehow, in your silence, in your way of listening without judgment, I heard things I'd been ignoring in myself for years. I see it all now. The lines we crossed, the glances that lingered too long, the spaces between words where feelings were born uninvited but undeniable. I've replayed it, Ava. Not because I want to rewrite it, but because I never want to disrespect what it truly was. A moment. A moment when two souls bruised and unsure found refuge in each other. You told me we had to be careful, and we were. Even when everything inside me wanted more, wanted to stay, I left not because I didn't care, but because I cared enough to protect what mattered, your peace and Maya's trust. I love her, and it's a young, stumbling, still learning kind of love. But I'm working on it. Every day, because you reminded me what it means to be seen, to show up. You gave me that without asking for anything in return. So this letter isn't to ask for another moment or reopen a door we both closed. It's just to say thank you, for the honesty, for the stillness, for the grace. You changed me, Ava, and I hope in some quiet corner of your memory you'll keep the version of me that stood in your kitchen that night, raw, imperfect, and deeply grateful. Always, Noah. And in the end, maybe this wasn't just a story about betrayal or blurred lines. It was a reminder that healing and temptation sometimes wear the same face. Was it wrong? Most would say yes. But what if for a moment two lonely hearts simply found a mirror in each other? Some will argue she betrayed her niece. Others might say she rediscovered herself. But in a world full of expectations and silence, is it ever really that black and white? So what do you think, was this a moment of weakness or a quiet kind of courage? Let me know in the comments. Follow me, so I have the motivation to create more powerful stories like this, or just hit the number 1 to show your support.